They say timing is everything, but when my boyfriend cheated while I battled cancer, I learned that timing can also be the cruelest teacher of all, and eventually, the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. The fluorescent lights in the oncology ward had become my second sunrise for months. Their harsh, sterile glow painted everything in shades of institutional hope and medical desperation. I'd grown accustomed to their hum, the way they flickered just slightly in the corner of my vision, like a visual reminder that nothing in this place was quite normal. Nothing in my life was quite normal anymore. The chemo drip had been my companion for 3 hours that Tuesday morning, and I was settling into that familiar fog of medication and exhaustion when my phone buzzed against my thigh. The sound cut through the ambient noise of machines and hushed conversations, sharp and insistent. I almost ignored it. Had been ignoring most calls lately, too tired to maintain the performance of being okay for everyone else's comfort. But something made me look. Maybe it was the way the light caught the screen, or maybe it was that sixth sense that develops when your world is already balanced on the edge of collapse. The notification wasn't a text from Marcus, my boyfriend of 3 years. It was a notification from Instagram, suggesting I might know someone in a photo. The photo that would split my world in half. My thumb moved without conscious thought, tapping the notification. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, as if the universe wanted to give me one last moment of ignorance. A restaurant I recognized, the little Italian place downtown where Marcus had taken me for our second anniversary. The same red checkered tablecloths, the same warm lighting that had made everything feel romantic and possible. But Marcus wasn't sitting across from me in this photo. He was sitting across from her, Jessica. His co-worker, the one he'd mentioned casually over the past few months, always with that particular tone that should have been a warning. The one who was allegedly just a friend, just someone he grabbed lunch with sometimes, just someone who understood the pressures of his job in ways I supposedly couldn't. They were leaning toward each other, and even through the grainy phone screen, I could see the intimacy in their posture, the way her hand rested on his forearm. The way he was looking at her, with an attention and presence I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The way he'd been looking at her while I was here, hooked to machines that were keeping me alive, fighting for our future. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't tell if it was the cancer or the betrayal stealing my breath. The chemo bag continued its steady drip, each drop marking time in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. I scrolled through the other photos tagged at the location. There were more. Dates stamped from different days over the past month. Marcus and Jessica laughing over wine. Marcus and Jessica sharing what looked like an intimate dessert. Marcus and Jessica walking hand in hand down the street outside the restaurant. The last photo was the one that broke something fundamental inside me. It was from last week. I knew because I could remember that exact day. I'd been too sick to eat, throwing up everything I tried to keep down, and Marcus had said he was working late. He'd texted me around 8, saying he'd grab dinner near the office and come home after I was asleep, so he wouldn't wake me. In the photo, he was kissing her. Not a friendly peck, not an accidental moment caught by an overeager photographer. This was deliberate, passionate, the kind of kiss that spoke of intimacy and promises, and a future being built in the shadows of my illness. The phone trembled in my hands, actually trembled, like I was experiencing a personal earthquake. The edges of my vision went white, then red, then settled into a strange, crystalline clarity that made every detail of the hospital room suddenly hyper-real. The texture of the scratchy hospital blanket, the antiseptic smell mixing with the peculiar metallic taste in my mouth from the chemo, the sound of my own breathing, shallow and rapid. I took a screenshot before I could think, before I could talk myself out of it. The evidence saved to my phone with a soft electronic sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Then I sat there, staring at the screen, while my body processed what my mind was still refusing to accept. The man I'd built my future around, the man I'd been fighting this disease for, the man who'd held my hand through diagnosis and promised we'd get through this together, that man was creating a parallel life with someone who didn't have to worry about losing her hair or whether she'd live to see 35. The nurse came by to check my vitals, and I managed to smile at her, managed to make the appropriate responses to her questions about my comfort level. But inside, I was cataloging every lie Marcus had told me over the past few months. Every time he'd claimed to be working late. Every time he'd seemed distant when I needed him most. Every time he'd avoided my eyes when I talked about our plans after treatment. I'd been fighting cancer with everything I had, and he'd been fighting his commitment to me with apparently just as much dedication. The strangest part was how calm I felt in that moment. Not the calm of peace, but the calm of someone who has just watched their world end and is waiting to see what world would be built in its place. The kind of calm that comes right before the storm, when the air gets still and heavy with possibility. I closed the Instagram app and opened my text messages. Marcus had sent me a message 2 hours ago while I was having poison pumped into my veins to save my life, while he was apparently planning his next date with Jessica. "How's treatment going today, babe? Love you. We'll bring dinner home tonight." I stared at those words for a long time. Love you. The casualness of it, the routine nature of it, the way it had become just another piece of punctuation in our relationship. I wondered if he'd texted her too, if he'd told her he loved her, if those words meant anything at all anymore, or if they were just sounds he made to maintain the illusion of caring. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A dozen responses formed in my mind, each one a different shade of rage and hurt and betrayal. But I didn't type any of them. Instead, I wrote, "Treatment going well. See you tonight." I needed time to think. Time to plan. Time to decide what kind of person I was going to be when I walked out of this hospital. Because I was going to walk out of this hospital. The doctors had been optimistic about my prognosis, and I'd been holding on to that hope like a lifeline. But now I realized I hadn't just been fighting for my life. I'd been fighting for a life that included Marcus, a future that we'd build together, a love that I'd thought was strong enough to weather anything. All of that was gone now, but I was still here, still fighting, still alive, and I was starting to realize that maybe that was enough. The chemo finished its slow drip, and I was released into the afternoon sunshine with instructions to rest and stay hydrated. The world outside the hospital looked different now, sharper, more vivid, like someone had adjusted the contrast on reality. Colors seemed more intense, sounds more distinct. I wondered if this was what clarity felt like, or if this was just what it felt like to have your illusions stripped away so completely that you could finally see what was actually there. I drove home slowly, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind racing through possibilities. Marcus would be there soon with dinner, playing the role of the devoted boyfriend, asking about my day and my symptoms and my prognosis. He'd probably hold me while I told him about the treatment, might even tear up a little when I described how tired I was, how scared I sometimes felt. The performance of caring. I wondered how long he'd been performing, how many months I'd been falling in love with an actor while the real Marcus fell in love with someone else. Our apartment looked different too. The photos of us together on the walls, the little domestic details that had felt like evidence of our shared future, the way he'd arranged his books next to mine on the shelves, all of it looked like a stage set now, props in a play I hadn't realized I was watching. I sat down on the couch and pulled up the photos again, studied them with the kind of clinical attention I'd learned to apply to my medical reports. Jessica was beautiful in a way that was effortless, healthy, glowing with the kind of vitality that I'd lost somewhere between diagnosis and treatment. Her hair was thick and shiny, her skin clear and pink, her smile bright and unworried. She looked like everything I used to be and everything I was afraid I'd never be again. But as I stared at the images, something else began to emerge from my initial shock and pain. Something colder, more calculating. Marcus had chosen to betray me during the most vulnerable time of my life. He'd chosen to build a relationship with someone else while I was fighting for my life, while I was trusting him to be my partner in the most literal sense. He'd chosen to give up on us before the fight was over. But I hadn't given up. I was still here, still fighting, still alive, and I was starting to realize that maybe his betrayal wasn't just his failure, maybe it was also my liberation. I heard his key in the lock just as the sun was setting. The sound that had once meant comfort and home now sent a spike of something sharp and cold through my chest. I closed my phone and arranged myself on the couch, trying to look like the sick girlfriend he expected to find, the one who would be grateful for his attention and would never question his devotion. The door opened and there he was. Marcus. My Marcus, except he wasn't mine anymore, was he? He'd been Jessica's for God knew how long, and I'd been too focused on staying alive to notice that he'd already started planning his life without me. He looked tired, and I caught myself wondering if he was tired from work or tired from maintaining 2 relationships. He smiled when he saw me, and it looked genuine, which somehow made everything worse. How could he smile at me like that, with such apparent affection, when he'd been kissing someone else? How could he compartmentalize so completely? "Hey, beautiful," he said, setting down a bag from my favorite Thai restaurant. "How is treatment today?" Beautiful. The word hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time I'd felt beautiful? When was the last time I'd looked in the mirror and seen anything other than the pale, thin person that cancer was making me become? When was the last time he'd called me beautiful and meant it, rather than just said it because it was what you said to your girlfriend who was dying? I realized I was staring at him and I forced myself to speak. It was okay. Tiring, but okay. He came over and kissed the top of my head, and I had to fight not to pull away. His lips felt foreign against my scalp, like they belonged to someone else now, someone who had been kissing Jessica just hours ago. "I brought your favorite," he said, unpacking the containers. "Pad Thai, extra peanuts, and that coconut soup you like." The efficiency of his care struck me. He knew exactly what I liked, exactly what would make me feel better, exactly how to take care of me. And yet he was taking care of someone else too, wasn't he? Learning her favorite foods, discovering what made her laugh, building intimacy with someone who didn't require this kind of careful maintenance. I watched him move around our kitchen, getting plates and utensils, warming up the food in the microwave. He looked so normal, so much like the Marcus I'd fallen in love with. But I kept seeing the images from the restaurant, the way he'd looked at Jessica, the way he'd kissed her. "Marcus," I said suddenly, my voice sounding strange in the quiet apartment. He turned, eyebrows raised. "Yeah?" I almost asked him then. Almost confronted him with the evidence, almost demanded an explanation, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, with that careful attention that I now recognized as pity rather than love. Maybe it was the realization that I already knew everything I needed to know, and that his explanations would only be more lies. Or maybe it was the growing certainty that I wanted to choose how this ended. I wanted to decide when and how and where this confrontation happened. I wanted to control at least one aspect of the destruction of my life. "Nothing," I said. "Just wanted to say thank you for taking care of me." He smiled, that same smile from the photos, and came over to squeeze my hand. "Always, babe. We're in this together, remember? We're in this together." The words echoed in my mind as we ate dinner, as he told me about his day at work, as he asked about my symptoms and my energy levels and my plans for tomorrow. We're in this together, except we weren't. He was in it with Jessica, and I was in it alone, fighting for a future that didn't actually exist. But I was still fighting, and I was starting to realize that maybe I wasn't fighting for the right things. After dinner, Marcus settled in to watch TV, and I excused myself to take a shower. Under the hot water, I let myself feel the full weight of what I'd learned. The betrayal, the loneliness, the fear that I'd been abandoned during the darkest time of my life. I let myself cry, finally, great heaving sobs that mixed with the water and washed down the drain. But when I turned off the water, I felt something else, something harder and colder and more focused than grief. I felt like someone who had just learned that she had nothing left to lose. The next few weeks passed in a strange suspension of reality. I went to my treatments, took my medications, followed my doctor's orders. I smiled at Marcus when he brought me food, thanked him when he drove me to appointments, leaned into his embraces when he held me. I played the role of the grateful girlfriend, the one who appreciated his devotion and never questioned his commitment. But inside I was planning. I started taking screenshots of everything. Every time he said he was working late, I'd check Jessica's social media. Every time he seemed distant or distracted, I'd document it. Every time he lied, and now I could recognize the lies, could see them in the way he avoided my eyes or changed the subject, I'd make a note. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do with all this evidence. I just knew that I wanted to have it, wanted to be able to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things, that my growing certainty about his betrayal was based on facts rather than the paranoia of a sick mind. And slowly, something else began to emerge from my surveillance. A pattern that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me. He was building a life with Jessica that looked exactly like the life he'd promised to build with me. The restaurants they went to were places we'd talked about trying. The activities they enjoyed were things he'd said he wanted to do with me after I got better. The future he was creating with her was the future I'd been fighting to survive for. He was living the life I was supposed to have, with the person who was supposed to be temporary. But the most devastating discovery came during my 4th week of detective work. I was scrolling through Jessica's Instagram. She posted constantly, and I'd become an expert at reading the subtext of her carefully curated life when I saw a photo that made me physically sick. It was a picture of flowers. Beautiful, expensive flowers, the kind that came from the fancy florist downtown. The caption was simple: "Someone special wanted to brighten my day." The timestamp was from 3 days ago. The same day I'd been admitted to the hospital for complications from my treatment, the day I'd been scared and alone and asking Marcus to come stay with me. He'd told me he couldn't leave work, that he had an important presentation to prepare for, that he'd come by as soon as he could. He'd finally shown up at 8 p.m., apologizing for being so late, bringing me the same type of flowers that were in Jessica's photo. He'd bought her flowers first, then bought me the same flowers as an afterthought. Or maybe he'd bought them at the same time, efficient multitasking for the two women in his life. I stared at that photo for a long time, lying in the hospital bed with machines beeping around me, while Marcus dozed in the chair beside me. I studied Jessica's manicured nails holding the bouquet, the way the light caught the petals, the carefully arranged beauty of it all, and I realized that I was done being the grateful girlfriend. I was done being the sick woman who should be thankful for whatever scraps of attention he threw my way. I was done being the victim in this story. I was ready to become something else entirely. The turning point came during my 6th week of treatment. The doctors had been increasingly optimistic about my prognosis, and I'd been feeling stronger, more like myself. The cancer was responding well to treatment, and for the first time in months, I could envision a future where I was healthy and alive and whole. But I couldn't envision a future where that healthy, alive, whole person was still with Marcus. That night, I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I was going to end this relationship, but I was going to do it right. I was going to wait until I was stronger, until I had more evidence, until I could confront him from a position of power rather than vulnerability. I was going to wait until I'd beaten cancer, and then I was going to beat him. The planning phase began in earnest. I started documenting everything more systematically, keeping a detailed record of his lies and absences and the growing evidence of his relationship with Jessica. I researched divorce lawyers, even though we weren't married, but I wanted to understand how to disentangle our shared life in the most strategic way possible. I opened a separate bank account and started moving money into it, a little at a time, so he wouldn't notice. I gathered documents, lease agreements, financial records, photos of everything in our apartment that belonged to me. I prepared for war with the methodical precision that I'd learned to apply to my medical treatment. And slowly, I began to realize that this planning was healing me in ways that the chemo never could. For months, I'd felt powerless, dependent, at the mercy of disease and treatment and other people's decisions about my care. But now I was making choices. I was taking control. I was deciding what my life would look like after I survived. Because I was going to survive. Not just the cancer, but all of it. The betrayal, the loneliness, the fear that I'd been abandoned. I was going to survive it all, and I was going to come out stronger. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had given up on me during my weakest moment, but his betrayal was actually making me stronger. His faithlessness was teaching me to have faith in myself. His abandonment was showing me that I could stand alone. I started working out again, as much as my treatment would allow. I began eating better, taking better care of myself, focusing on rebuilding my strength. I bought new clothes that fit my changing body, started wearing makeup again, did small things to feel more like myself. Marcus noticed the changes, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. I think he'd expected me to get sicker, weaker, more dependent on him. Instead, I was becoming more vibrant, more self-sufficient, more myself than I'd been in months. "You look great," he said one evening, and I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, really strong. "I feel strong," I told him, and it was true. I felt strong in ways I'd never felt before, strong enough to face whatever came next. He studied my face for a moment, and I wondered if he could see the change in me, the way I'd stopped looking at him with adoration and started looking at him with assessment. But he just smiled and squeezed my hand, and I let him because I wasn't ready yet. Soon, but not yet. The evidence continued to accumulate. Photos of Marcus and Jessica at events around town, social media posts that hinted at inside jokes and shared experiences, a pattern of absences and lies that painted a clear picture of a man living a double life. But the most damning evidence came from Marcus himself. I'd started paying closer attention to his phone, not in a desperate, suspicious way, but with the calm focus of someone gathering information. I noticed when he'd smile at messages, when he'd turn the screen away from me, when he'd disappear into the bathroom with his phone for longer than necessary. And then, one night, he forgot to take his phone with him when he went to shower. I stared at it sitting on the nightstand, and I knew this was a moment of choice. I could respect his privacy, continue to pretend that I didn't know what I knew, maintain the fiction that we were still a couple working through my illness together, or I could find out the truth. I picked up the phone. It was protected by a passcode, but I knew Marcus. I knew his patterns, his important dates, his habits. I tried our anniversary first, then his birthday, then mine. Nothing. Then I tried Jessica's birthday. The phone unlocked immediately. The betrayal of that detail hit me harder than anything else had. He'd changed his passcode to her birthday. The security on his phone, the thing that protected his most private thoughts and communications, was now organized around her life rather than mine. I didn't have long before the shower would end, so I moved quickly. I opened his messages and found what I was looking for immediately. The conversation with Jessica was pinned to the top of his text list, marked with a heart emoji. I scrolled through their recent messages, and each one was like a small knife to the chest. They talked about everything: work, their feelings, plans for the future. They said they loved each other. They talked about me, about my illness, about when and how Marcus would end things with me. "I just want to make sure she's okay first," he'd written. "She's been through so much, and I don't want to hurt her while she's still sick." "I know," Jessica had replied. "You're so good to her. I love how caring you are." "I can't wait until this is all over and we can be together openly," he'd written back. "I hate hiding this." I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking with rage and adrenaline. Then I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and went to sit on the couch, my mind spinning. He was waiting for me to get better so he could leave me. He was performing devotion and care while planning his escape. He was using my illness as a timeline for his betrayal, waiting for me to be strong enough to handle being abandoned. The shower was still running, and I could hear him singing, actually singing like he was happy, like he was looking forward to something. I realized that I was looking forward to something too. I was looking forward to the moment when I could stop pretending, when I could show him exactly what I'd learned and exactly what I thought of his performance. But not yet. I still had more work to do. The next phase of my planning was the most challenging because it required me to actively participate in the lie. I had to smile when he brought me flowers, knowing he'd bought identical ones for Jessica. I had to thank him for his care, knowing he was providing the same care to someone else. I had to let him hold me, knowing his arms had been around another woman just hours before. But I also began to understand that my performance was becoming more sophisticated than his. While he was just lying about his whereabouts and his feelings, I was orchestrating an entire campaign. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger and more strategic than the woman who'd been diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago. I was becoming someone who could win. The doctors were increasingly optimistic about my prognosis. The cancer was responding well to treatment, and they were talking about remission, about follow-up care, about the future. I was going to survive this, and I was going to be okay. More than okay. I was going to be free. As my health improved, I began to feel more like myself than I had in months. The fog of illness and treatment was lifting, and I could think more clearly, plan more effectively, see the bigger picture of what I wanted my life to look like. And Marcus wasn't in that picture anymore. The final piece of evidence came during my 8th week of treatment. I was feeling strong enough to drive myself to appointments, and I'd told Marcus I didn't need him to come with me. He'd seemed relieved, which should have been a warning sign, but I was glad to have the freedom to move around without his careful attention. On my way home from the hospital, I decided to stop by his office to surprise him. I'd been thinking about how to confront him, and I wanted to see his workplace, to understand the environment where he'd been building his relationship with Jessica. The office building was downtown, all glass and steel and modern efficiency. I'd been there before, but not recently, not since I'd gotten sick. I parked in the visitor lot and walked through the lobby, feeling stronger and more purposeful than I had in months. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, where Marcus worked in marketing for a tech company. The receptionist recognized me and smiled, asked how I was feeling, told me that Marcus was in a meeting but would be out soon. I decided to wait in the break room, where I could sit quietly and prepare for the conversation I was about to have. But as I walked down the hallway, I heard voices from the conference room, and one of them was Marcus. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see inside. There was Marcus, presenting to a small group of colleagues, including Jessica. But that wasn't what made me stop and stare. It was the way they were looking at each other. Even in this professional setting, even surrounded by coworkers, there was an intimacy in their glances, a familiarity in their body language that spoke of a deep connection. And then I saw Jessica do something that made my blood run cold. She was wearing a necklace that I recognized, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant that Marcus had given me for my birthday 2 years ago. The necklace I'd been too sick to wear recently, the one that had been sitting in my jewelry box for months. He'd given her my necklace. Not just any necklace, but the one he'd given me, the one that was supposed to symbolize his love for me. I stood there in the hallway, watching the woman who'd been sleeping with my boyfriend wear the jewelry he'd given me, and I felt something crystallize inside me. Not just anger, not just hurt, but a cold determination that felt like stepping into armor. I turned around and walked back to the elevator, back to my car, back to our apartment. But I wasn't the same person who'd left that morning. I was someone else now. Someone who'd seen enough and learned enough and planned enough. I was someone who was ready to act. That night, I cooked Marcus's favorite dinner. I lit candles, opened a bottle of wine, dressed in the nicest clothes I owned. I wanted to look strong and beautiful and healthy, wanted him to see what he was giving up, wanted him to understand exactly what he'd lost. When he came home, he was surprised and pleased by the effort I'd made. He kissed me and told me I looked amazing, and I let him because it would be the last time. "What's the occasion?" he asked, settling into his chair at our small dining table. "I wanted to celebrate," I said, pouring the wine. "The doctors are really optimistic about my prognosis. They think I'm going to be okay." His smile was genuine, and for a moment I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him. "That's incredible news, babe. I'm so proud of you, so proud of how strong you've been." "I have been strong," I agreed. "Stronger than I ever thought I could be." We ate dinner and talked about my treatment, about the future, about our plans for when I was fully recovered. He seemed relaxed, happy, like he was looking forward to moving into the next phase of our relationship. Except there wasn't going to be a next phase, at least not the one he was expecting. After dinner, I poured more wine and sat down across from him. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about something." He looked up from his phone, which he'd been checking throughout the meal. "Sure, what's up?" I pulled out my own phone and opened the folder where I'd been saving screenshots. "I need to talk to you about Jessica." The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from his face, and his eyes went wide with a kind of panic that would have been satisfying if it wasn't so pathetic. "What do you mean?" he asked, but his voice was already shaking. I turned my phone around and showed him the first screenshot, the photo of him and Jessica at the restaurant. "I mean, I know about Jessica. I know about the dates, the flowers, the lies. I know about all of it." He stared at the screen, and I watched him mentally scramble for an explanation, an excuse, a way to minimize what I'd discovered. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "We're just friends. We work together and sometimes we grab lunch." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut through his lies. "Don't insult me with more lies. I've seen enough. I know enough. I'm done pretending I don't know what's been happening." I swiped to the next screenshot, then the next, showing him the evidence I'd been gathering for weeks. Photos of them together, messages between them, documentation of every lie he'd told me. "You've been building a life with her while I've been fighting for mine," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "You've been planning your future with her while pretending to care about my survival." He started to speak, but I held up my hand to stop him. "The necklace, Marcus. You gave her my necklace. The one you gave me for my birthday. The one that was supposed to mean something special between us. You gave her my jewelry while I was too sick to wear it." That detail seemed to hit him harder than anything else, maybe because it was so petty and cruel and impossible to explain away. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been with her?" He looked down at his hands, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. 3 months. 3 months? I'd been in treatment for 4 months, which meant he'd started his relationship with Jessica just 1 month after my diagnosis. 1 month after we'd gotten the news that would change everything. 1 month after I'd needed him most. "Why?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was scared and lonely, and you were so sick, and I didn't know if I was going to survive." I finished for him. He nodded miserably. "I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle watching you suffer, couldn't handle the possibility that I might lose you. It was easier to just start over." "Easier to start over," I repeated. While I was fighting for my life, you decided it was easier to find someone healthy to love. I never stopped loving you, he said desperately. You just what? You just decided to hedge your bets? You just decided to have a backup plan in case I died? He flinched at my words, but I wasn't done. I read your messages, Marcus. I know you've been planning to leave me as soon as I'm strong enough to handle it. I know you've been waiting for me to get better so you could break up with me without feeling guilty about abandoning a sick woman. It wasn't like that, he said weakly. It was exactly like that, I said. You were going to wait until I survived cancer, until I was healthy and strong and grateful to be alive, and then you were going to tell me you'd found someone else. You were going to let me fight for my life while you were already planning your life without me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see in his face that he knew I was right, that there was no explanation that would make this okay, no excuse that would justify what he'd done. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. No, I said, standing up from the table. You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. I walked to the bedroom and pulled out a suitcase, his suitcase. I'd already packed it earlier that day, filled it with his clothes and toiletries and the few personal items that belonged to him. I'd been planning this moment for weeks, and I wasn't going to let it devolve into a messy argument or a pathetic attempt at reconciliation. I brought the suitcase back to the living room and set it down beside him. What's that? He asked. Your things? I said. You're leaving. Tonight. He looked at the suitcase, then at me. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can... No, I said firmly. We can't. You made your choice 3 months ago. You chose her over me, chose healthy over sick, chose easy over hard. You don't get to change your mind now that I'm getting better. He stood up, and for a moment I thought he might try to argue, might try to convince me to give him another chance. But then he looked at my face, and I think he finally understood that this wasn't a negotiation. This was a declaration. Where am I supposed to go? He asked. I don't care, I said. Go to Jessica. Go to your parents. Go to a hotel. But you're not staying here. He picked up the suitcase, his movements slow and reluctant. What about us? What about everything we built together? You destroyed everything we built together, I said. You destroyed it the moment you decided I wasn't worth waiting for. He walked toward the door, then turned back to me. I do love you, he said. I know you don't believe me, but I do. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd been my partner and my betrayer, my support and my destroyer. Love isn't just a feeling, Marcus. It's a choice. It's a commitment. It's showing up when things get hard. And you didn't do any of that. I was scared, he said again. I was scared too, I replied. I was scared of dying, scared of suffering, scared of losing everything I cared about. But I didn't use my fear as an excuse to hurt the person I loved most. He stood there for another moment, maybe hoping I'd change my mind, maybe hoping I'd forgive him, maybe hoping I'd let him stay and pretend this had never happened. But I was done hoping. I was done pretending. I was done letting other people's fears dictate my life. Goodbye, Marcus, I said. He left without another word, and I locked the door behind him. Then I sat down on the couch and felt the weight of what I'd just done. I'd ended the relationship that had been the center of my world for 3 years. I'd chosen to be alone rather than to be with someone who didn't deserve my love, but I didn't feel alone. I felt free. The next few days were strange and difficult and liberating all at once. I had to learn how to be in the apartment without Marcus, how to cook for one person, how to fill the silence he'd left behind. But I also had to learn how to be proud of myself, how to celebrate my own strength, how to envision a future that was entirely my own. I continued my treatment, but now I was doing it for myself rather than for us. I was fighting to live my life, not our life. I was fighting to be healthy so I could build something new and better and entirely mine. The doctors were amazed by my progress. The cancer was responding even better to treatment than they'd hoped, and they were talking about remission, about recovery, about a future where I wouldn't have to think about being sick. I was going to survive. I was going to be okay. And I was going to do it all without Marcus. 2 weeks after he left, I got a text from him. Can we talk? I made a mistake. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about all the ways I could respond. I could ignore it, block his number, pretend he didn't exist. I could tell him exactly what I thought of his mistake and his sudden desire to reconcile. Instead, I wrote back, "No, we can't." Then I blocked his number. A month later, I saw Jessica at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, picking out apples, wearing the necklace that used to be mine. She looked up and saw me, and I watched her face go through a series of emotions: surprise, guilt, fear, defiance. She started to walk toward me, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize, maybe to justify what she'd done. But I turned away and walked to another aisle. I didn't want to hear her explanation. I didn't want her apology. I didn't want anything from her at all. I just wanted to buy my groceries and go home to my apartment, to my life, to my future that was entirely my own. 3 months after Marcus left, I got the news I'd been waiting for. The cancer was in remission. I was officially, medically, completely healthy. I celebrated by myself in my apartment with a bottle of champagne and a toast to my own strength. I'd beaten cancer, and I'd beaten the man who'd tried to abandon me because of it. I'd survived the disease and the betrayal and the loneliness and the fear. I'd survived everything. 6 months after Marcus left, I ran into him at a coffee shop downtown. He was with Jessica, and they both looked uncomfortable when they saw me. I looked healthy and strong and happy, and I could see in their faces that they knew I was doing well without them. Marcus started to approach me, but I shook my head and walked away. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to hear about his life or his relationship or his regrets. I just wanted to order my coffee and go home to my life, which was better than it had ever been. 1 year after Marcus left, I was completely healthy, completely happy, and completely myself. I'd learned to love my own company, to trust my own judgment, to build a life that was entirely mine. I'd learned that surviving wasn't just about beating cancer. It was about beating everything that tried to destroy you, including the people who were supposed to love you most. I'd learned that sometimes the person who abandons you during your darkest moment is actually giving you the greatest gift of all, the gift of discovering that you're strong enough to save yourself. I'd learned that love isn't just about finding someone who will stay with you when you're healthy and happy. It's about finding someone who will fight for you when you're sick and scared and vulnerable. And I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let someone go, especially when they've already chosen to leave. Marcus had given up on me during my weakest moment, but his betrayal had taught me something invaluable. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resilient than I'd ever known, more capable of surviving than I'd ever believed. His faithlessness had taught me to have faith in myself. His abandonment had taught me that I could stand alone. His betrayal had taught me what real love looked like and what it didn't. I was grateful for the lesson, even if I'd never be grateful for the teacher. 2 years after Marcus left, I was in a new relationship with someone who understood that love is a choice you make every day, not just when things are easy. Someone who saw my scars and my strength and chose both. Someone who knew that I'd survived cancer and betrayal and had decided I was worth fighting for. I was happy in a way I'd never been happy before, strong in a way I'd never been strong before, whole in a way I'd never been whole before. I was alive, and I was free, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The cancer had tried to kill me, and Marcus had tried to abandon me, but I'd survived both. I'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who teach you the most about your own strength. I'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the best thing that happens to you, because it shows you what you're truly capable of surviving. I'd learned that betrayal isn't just about what someone does to you. It's about what you choose to do with what they've done. And I'd chosen to survive. I'd chosen to be strong. I'd chosen to build a life that was entirely my own. That was the best revenge of all.